Mil told me that I should quit my job and stay home where I belong. She said, a wife should be with her husband. So I booked us a couple's spa retreat, and left her at home with the kids. I'm Astrid, 34, married to my husband Ezekiel, 36. I'm an ER nurse in Chicago, and if you know anything about ER work, you know it's not just a job, it's chaos. Long hours, odd shifts, and enough adrenaline to keep you wired even on your days off. Ezekiel works from home in IT, which means he has the luxury of setting his schedule. Together, we have 2 kids, Roscoe, 6, who's just started 1st grade, and Lila, 4, who's in daycare. Now, I don't want to paint a picture-perfect image of our life, it's not perfect. Some weeks, we're just hanging on by a thread. But we love each other, and we've figured out a system that works. Or at least, it worked until Glenda decided to crash into our lives like a runaway freight train. Glenda is my husband's mother, and she's a lot. Picture the most stereotypical 1950s housewife you can imagine, but with a sharper tongue and an opinion about everything. She grew up in a small town in Iowa, where everyone seemed to share her worldview. Women cook, clean, and raise the kids, while men bring home the bacon. If you ask her, the world's problems started when women got jobs and stopped baking casseroles every night. For most of our marriage, I only had to deal with Glenda during holidays and the occasional visit. She'd always drop little comments, things like, oh, it must be so hard for Ezekiel to handle things when you're at work so much, or, it's so nice that you have a career, but I'd never trade my time at home for anything. Annoying, but manageable. That all changed when she moved to Chicago 6 months ago. Apparently, Glenda decided that being 3 hours away wasn't close enough to her son and grandkids. Without asking or warning us, she sold her house and bought a condo just a few blocks from ours. She told us it was a surprise, and that we should be happy she was around to help. I wasn't happy. I was furious. At first, I tried to make the best of it. She was Ezekiel's mom, after all, and I wanted to keep the peace. But Glenda wasn't content with casual visits. She started dropping by unannounced at least 3 times a week. Usually, it was in the mornings, when Ezekiel was locked in his office for work and I was rushing to get the kids ready for school or daycare. It didn't matter if I was running late or in the middle of something, she'd sit at our kitchen table, sipping coffee and offering her unsolicited opinions. You let Roscoe wear that shirt? It's all wrinkled. He looks like no one cares about him. Why are you giving Lila cereal for breakfast? When Ezekiel was her age, I made pancakes every morning. Astrid, honey, do you think you're maybe doing too much? It seems like Ezekiel and the kids would really benefit if you cut back at work. At first, I just ignored her. Smiled through gritted teeth, nodded, and went about my business. But the comments kept coming, each one more pointed than the last. She started asking Ezekiel why I was working so much. She'd make passive-aggressive remarks about how a wife's place is with her husband and kids. Then came the day she crossed a line. It was a Monday morning, and I was already in a rush. I'd worked a double shift the night before, gotten maybe 3 hours of sleep, and now I was trying to get the kids dressed and out the door so I wouldn't be late for my 12-hour shift. Glenda showed up unannounced, again, and let herself in with the spare key Ezekiel had given her without asking me. She breezed into the kitchen, all smiles, and started her usual routine of judging everything in sight. You're packing Roscoe's lunch? That's nice, but don't you think a warm meal would be better? I didn't answer. I was too busy looking for Lila's missing shoe. Astrid, I've been meaning to talk to you about something, she said, in that tone people use when they're about to say something awful and want to pretend it's helpful. I really think you should consider staying home. It's just not natural for a mother to be away from her kids so much. Ezekiel works so hard, and he needs a wife who's there for him. I froze. Not because I was surprised, but because I knew if I opened my mouth, I'd say something I couldn't take back. Glenda, oblivious or just unconcerned, kept going. I mean, you have a good job, sure, but is it really worth sacrificing your family? A wife should be with her husband. That was it. I'd had enough. Glenda, I said, turning to face her. If you want to give me advice about my marriage or my kids, you can do it while packing lunches and finding shoes. Otherwise, you can leave. She looked stunned, like no one had ever dared to talk back to her before. But she didn't leave. Instead, she crossed her arms and said, I'm just trying to help. You don't have to get so defensive. I didn't have time for a fight, so I just ignored her and got the kids out the door. But the whole drive to work, her words played on a loop in my head. A wife should be with her husband. Like I wasn't already doing everything I could to balance work, marriage, and motherhood. Like I wasn't running myself ragged to give my family the best life possible. That night, I vented to Ezekiel. He listened, nodded, and said all the right things, but when I asked him to talk to his mom, he hesitated. She doesn't mean any harm, he said. She's just old-fashioned. That was when I realized something. If I wanted to put Glenda in her place, I'd have to do it myself. And I had the perfect plan. Over the next few days, I kept replaying Glenda's words in my head. Every time I packed a lunch or wiped a crayon mural off the wall, I thought about her sitting there, judging me. Every time I clocked in at work, I heard her voice saying, a wife should be with her husband. Something had to change, and I wasn't going to wait for Ezekiel to step in. That's when I came up with an idea. Glenda wanted me to focus on my family. Fine. I'd focus on my family, just not in the way she expected. The next time Glenda came over, I brought up the idea casually. Ezekiel and I have been so busy lately, I said, carefully keeping my tone light. I was thinking we could use a little getaway, just the two of us. A couple's spa retreat. You know, to reconnect. Her eyes lit up. That sounds lovely, dear. A wife should prioritize her husband. I bit back a grin. Exactly. But it's hard to arrange something like that with the kids. We'd need someone we trust to watch them for the weekend. She didn't even hesitate. Oh, you can leave them with me. I'd be happy to help. Perfect. Over the next week, I planned everything, a gorgeous spa retreat in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, complete with couples massages, private dinners, and champagne by the fireplace. Of course, I didn't book it for Ezekiel and me, I booked it for myself. My husband didn't even know what I was planning yet, but I knew he'd go along with it. He owed me for not dealing with his mother, and I was ready to cash in that favor. The Friday of the retreat arrived, and I spent the morning packing my things. When Glenda showed up, I had the kids' meals prepped, their clothes laid out, and a long, detailed schedule typed up for her. She seemed genuinely excited to step in and show me how it's done. You two have fun, she said as I handed over the list. It'll be good for the kids to have some real stability for a change. I smiled sweetly. Thank you, Glenda. We're so lucky to have you. Ezekiel was confused when I showed up at his office with my overnight bag. I thought we were going together, he asked. Nope, I said, handing him a list of chores I'd prepared for him, too. You're staying here. Your mom says it's important for a wife to focus on her husband, and I agree. But I can't do that if I'm burnt out, so I'm taking the weekend to relax. You and Glenda can focus on the kids together. Have fun. Before he could argue, I kissed him on the cheek, grabbed my bag, and left. The spa retreat was heaven. I didn't feel a shred of guilt as I soaked in the hot tub, drank mimosas, and got a massage that almost brought me to tears. I slept in a king-sized bed with no tiny feet kicking me in the ribs and no early morning wake-up calls. For 2 glorious days, I was just Astrid, not a mom, not a wife, and certainly not Glenda's daughter-in-law. Back at home, things weren't going so smoothly. When I finally turned my phone on Sunday afternoon, it was flooded with missed calls and texts. Glenda, it seemed, was not having the relaxing weekend she'd imagined. The kids had run her ragged, Ezekiel had retreated to his office, to work, and she'd been left alone to deal with everything from temper tantrums to a spilled carton of milk that somehow soaked into her shoes. One text stood out in particular. I don't know how you do this every day. I took my time driving home, savoring the last few moments of peace. When I walked through the door, the house looked like a tornado had passed through it. Glenda was slumped on the couch, looking like she'd aged 10 years. Ezekiel was standing in the kitchen, holding Lila, who was crying about something or other. Roscoe was jumping on the couch, despite Glenda's weak attempts to stop him. Oh, good, you're home, she said, her voice strained. I think I'm coming down with something. I'll just head out now. I didn't try to stop her. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, Ezekiel finally spoke up. That was a lot. I had no idea how much you do around here. Yeah, I said, folding a pile of laundry. It is. He sighed. And Mom, she's not coming back for a while. She said she needs to rest. I couldn't help but smile. Glenda didn't bring up my job again after that weekend. She still came over sometimes, but the sharp comments stopped. It's amazing how a little reality check can change someone's perspective. As for me, I learned something important, too. Sometimes, the best way to fight back isn't with words. It's with actions, and a well-timed spa retreat.